Hello everyone. Today we are going to discuss a few concepts introduced by Jean Baudrillard, the concepts of simulation, simulacra and hyperreality. This class is prepared as an introductory class to one of the essays written by Jean Baudrillard, which is prescribed for your study. The essay is titled, "The Gulf War Did Not Take Place." So in this particular essay, Jean Baudrillard is actually trying to bring out the media's contribution in the Gulf War. He says that the Gulf War was mostly a media-created event rather than a real war. He elaborates on that and he bases his arguments basically on these three concepts: simulation, simulacra and hyperreality. To move into the first term, simulation. What is simulation? Simulation is basically, it means imitation. We are all familiar with the term imitation, and in philosophy there have been an umpteen number of theories of imitation. The theory of imitation is not new because it goes back to the time of Plato. Plato talks about a reality which exists somewhere outside the world, and he talks about how that reality is reflected in the things that we see around us. So he says reality is twice removed from the things that it represents. The idea of imitation was later taken into literature and art by the people like Aristotle, Romantic writers, and the later writers who considered imitation, who considered poetry as an imitation of life, who considered literature as an imitation of the society, as a reflection of the society in which they belonged. Coming to Baudrillard's idea of simulation, he defines simulation as the process of imitating, as the process of creating simulacra. Simulacra basically means copies of something which is original. The main idea focuses on 4 stages of simulation. The first stage is what he calls the sacramental order. A sacramental order is a faithful copy or a faithful image of the reality that already exists. It is just like a camera copying your picture, where you are the reality. As we believe, there is no other reality, there is nothing else which is as real as me. So if I take myself as the reality, the camera which copies me becomes the first stage, which is a faithful copy or image. And that is what he calls a sacramental order, because there is no addition, there is no deletion, it is the exact representation of the reality. Secondly, second order is what he calls the order of maleficence. The order of maleficence is a perversion of reality. Here, the original undergoes a few changes. It still looks like the original, it might still feel like the original, but there is a perversion of reality happening. There are certain additions or deletions happening, and it is not a faithful copy of the original. That is what he calls the order of maleficence. He says that in the order of maleficence, the simulation, the process of imitation, actually masks or denatures reality, denatures the original. So going back to the example we talked about in the first one, me as a reality, me as the original and the camera copying me, I turn on the beauty mode, all the pimples, all my scars on my face, they are removed, and that is the order of maleficence. I very clearly know that this is not a faithful copy of me, but it is a perverted sense of reality. So that is the order of maleficence. The third stage of simulation is what he calls the order of sorcery. There is no black magic directly involved here, but he means that in the third stage, it pretends to be a faithful image, but it is marked by the absence of the original. So what happens here is, there is a reality, but that reality undergoes a lot of changes, and that is presented in the third stage. Going back to the example, me as a reality, the beauty mode, which brings me to the second stage of simulation, and I make a cartoon image of me, and that is what comes under the order of sorcery. Here there is an absence of a profound reality, but it pretends to be real. See, if you see a cartoon image of me, you very clearly understand that this is Betty. But the reality is, it is not actually me. There are certain characteristics which take it away from the original. So there is an absence of a profound reality. It pretends to be a faithful copy, but it is a copy with no original. This third stage is marked a lot by the artificiality. So this artificiality is what characterizes the third stage of simulation. Coming to the fourth stage, which he calls pure simulation, is where the original no more has any role. Here is where there is a confusion. You don't know how to differentiate between the real and the fictional. The fourth stage becomes so real, it appears so real to us that you start forgetting that there is no originality behind it. So it is an imitation with no reality, and it has no direct connection to reality as well. Now this is the stage where he calls the feature of hyperreality comes into play. Hyperreality is where there is the consciousness is unable to distinguish between the real and the artificial. There is no blending. There is so much of blending of the real and the artificial. There is so much of blending of the physical reality and the virtual reality that it becomes hard for the person who observes to distinguish between the real and the artificial. Baudrillard actually characterizes these four stages of simulation into 3 ages. He calls it 3 orders, the 3 orders of simulation. It is basically the same thing which is put into 3 ages, 3 parts of history. So he says that the sacramental order and the order of maleficence were basically found during the pre-modern age, when the technology was not very much active. People used to create faithful copies, and there were not many copies of the original, but a few copies. The inability to produce a lot of copies, that was very much marked in the first and the second stages. He calls it the pre-modern age. The first order simulation was mainly found in the pre-modern age. Now the second order of simulation, he says, is marked in the order of sorcery, and it's a combination of the order of maleficence and the order of sorcery. He categorizes that as the modern age, or the age of industrial revolution. So as we said before, the perverted copy of reality, which comes in the order of maleficence, and the copy which has no direct connection with the original, which comes in the order of sorcery, was basically happening during the Industrial Revolution. Industrial Revolution promoted the factories to produce number of copies of the same thing, where the labor was estranged, the labor was alienated from the product. So here he says that these two orders, order of maleficence and the order of sorcery, are characteristic of, they are representation of the modern age or that of industrial revolution. And the last one, pure simulation, he says that happens mostly in the postmodern age of late capitalism. Here he examines the relationship between symbols, culture and the society. He says that the copies that are produced during this time, during the postmodern age, felt the freedom, they took the freedom to move away from the original, where they looked almost similar to the original and they did not have the features, or they did not have all the qualities of the original. So that is what happened in the postmodern age. So these are the three orders of simulation, three ages into which he categorizes the stages of simulation, the stages of imitation. Now, we'll look at an example. All these four stages can be traced using a simple metaphor of an egg. As we know, this egg that you find in my hand is the reality. This egg is the reality where it has all the features of an egg. It is basically characterized by its fragile nature. If it falls down, it might break. So this is the reality that the first one that I'm talking about. When it comes to the first stage, the sacramental order, I take a picture of this egg and paste it here. That becomes the sacramental order. It's a faithful copy or image. It's a faithful copy of the original, of the reality. In the second stage, the order of maleficence, this egg, it is the same thing which is the egg, but it is into a different shape or a different format. So it might either be a bullseye in front of you, it is still the egg, but it is not the same oval shaped reality that I have in my hand. The third stage, the order of sorcery, is where there is no connection with the reality, but it pretends to be the real. You might have heard of eggless omelettes, which is made of besan or the gram flour. So eggless omelette is again another example for this third stage of simulation, where there is no direct connection with the reality, with the egg, but it is something that pretends to be an omelette, pretends to have the essence of this reality I have in my hand. And the fourth one is pure simulation. We might recall our attention to the media where there was a news of plastic eggs coming to our markets from the neighboring states, from the neighboring countries and so on. Now, what does this plastic egg represent? The plastic egg is the best example for this pure simulation. It looks like the reality. It has every feature of the reality that I have in my hand. But here there is a difficulty to realize what is real and what is artificial. So if this plastic egg comes to our market, we might mistakenly take it for the real egg. So that is the fourth stage of simulation. So here Baudrillard, according to Baudrillard's idea, the pure simulation is so powerful, it is so efficient in its makeup, in its manufacture, that it makes the people it makes the consumers worried about what is real and what is not real. And they might very happily go after these plastic eggs because they consider that to be more real than the original reality. Another example for this pure simulation is the augmented reality. Lockdown was a period when many people experimented with augmented reality. Google provided free opportunities for people to experiment with this 3D view of animals and birds in our living rooms. So, as you see, the tiger that has come is an example for this augmented reality. Google, the definition that Google gives, or the description that the Google gives for this augmented reality is that you can move around this animal, you can feel, you can experience the animal as if it were real. You might have heard the sounds of tiger by this time. So this is another example where hyper reality comes into play. There are also many other examples. If you look at the world around you, we might start thinking, it becomes a little scary to understand that we live in a hyper-real world. The media has a lot of impact on the people. The media has influenced our mindset so much that we become that we become accustomed to the hyper-reality. We start believing that those are real. The advertisements, the news articles that come, all these are based on a power politics. Every matter that comes before you is a result of this power politics. So Baudrillard identifies 5 areas, especially 5 areas where hyper-reality becomes so pronounced. The first one is the contemporary media. This will be very clear when we do the essay, The Gulf War Did Not Take Place. Baudrillard is of the view that media creates hyper-reality and makes people believe that whatever has not happened has actually happened. So contemporary media is one such example where pure simulation or hyper-reality happens the most. Another example he gives is the exchange value. A 2,000 rupee note that we have, it might look just like a paper. What gives it the value? The value that it attains is something which is imposed on it. The value of the 2,000 rupee note is something which is imposed on it by certain people in power. So the exchange value is another example of hyper-reality. He says that unlike the earlier system where people used to barter things and services for the value that the thing itself had, here we replace it with a paper note attributing certain value to that object. So the real object is far away. The value of the real object is far removed from the reality. You can just buy it with a paper note. The third instance that he gives is that of multinational capitalism. Baudrillard says that the multinational capitalism is again another area where you experience hyper-reality. This is where a number of copies of the same original is being produced, and we come to this question of what is the original. We completely forget about the resources that go behind it. We completely forget about the raw materials, the labor that has gone behind it to make that product alive. So multinational capitalism is another area where you experience this hyper-reality to a great extent. Another one is urbanization, which he says has alienated people from the living world. Urbanization, the coming up of cities, have totally alienated people from the non-living world. People become disconnected with nature. People become more involved in the artificial realities that is behind them. And finally, he says that language and ideology have also become hyper-real. Now, what does that mean? Language, the words, the mythos that we use, no more mean what we actually say. There is a lot of connotations given to whatever we say. Every text, you take literature, every text undergoes a lot of deconstructive reading. Every text undergoes a lot of reading beyond the lines, and it loses the original intention of the author. So language and ideology are also subject to the power politics, and that leads to a hyper-reality, that leads people to believe that certain language is superior, certain ideology is superior. So that's how he comes to a conclusion and says that simulation is this process of imitation which has created a lot of copies, removing it from the original sense. And hyper-reality is the world we live in, and that is what he exactly tries to prove through the essay Gulf War Did Not Take Place. Thank you.